and welcome to the podcast where friends discuss environmental policies from around the planet. Hey guys, and welcome back to another Extra Policy episode. I'm Ala, and I'm here with Ajwa. Hey girl.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good, and we're the Planet Policy Pals. We haven't said that in a long time, but we are. Today we're going to discuss a topic that I care a lot about, and it's the failure of the Bamako Convention as it deals with the import of hazardous waste into African nations, specifically electronic waste. So we've talked about this convention a little bit on our first ever episode, the UNEP episode, which you should listen to that if you haven't. It was a good one, I would say.
Yeah, I agree.
We promised you guys we would revisit it, and now we're doing a whole extra policy. So you're welcome. Originally, there was like the Basel Convention, which was supposed to encourage parties to enter bilateral, multilateral, and regional agreements on hazardous waste being transported across different borders. And it came into effect in 1989. It was supposed to limit transboundary shipments of hazardous waste, but it pretty much failed to do that in terms of developing nations, which big surprise. Am I right? I think what really limited the Basel Convention was the lack of uniformity in defining terminologies such as hazardous and waste. And honestly, this is a big thing that we talk about a lot in the environmental engineering science policy circle. What is hazardous waste? And sometimes they just call it solid waste. It's really iffy to define, and you have to be really clear on it, or you leave it up to interpretation. And that's what happened here. So individual nations now define what hazardous waste is to them, which, are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah, you can't even get these people to accept or agree on what peace means.
Exactly. Thank you. So yeah, exporters will just exploit that, and they'll be like, well, this isn't exactly waste, it's a commodity, so we're just gonna send it. Eventually, African nations were like, all right, well, fuck you very much. And 12 nations got together of the African Union, which was formerly the Organization of African Unity, in Bamako, Mali, and that was in 1991. The convention came into effect in 1998, and it currently has 29 signatories and 25 parties. It's a really big problem, the import of electronic waste specifically, but just hazardous waste in general, is a really big problem in African nations. So if you want to just go on Google and just Google that, you can see news articles about that happening all the time, like containers getting turned back. Italy and Spain are some big offenders, but there's other developed or mostly European nations that do that as well. Egypt gets affected, Morocco, Nigeria, Ghana. Those are some of the really big places that got affected. In fact, two really famous cases where the importance of these kind of conventions and the need for them came to light were the cocoa case, which was in the 1980s. And Italy paid a small fishing town called Coco in Nigeria $100 a month to store toxic waste.
That's it?
Yeah, $100 a month. They paid the entire fishing village. You know how much this pissed me off? Because I'm from the southern part of Nigeria, and in the southern part of Nigeria, there are lots of course, there are cities and stuff like that, but there are a lot of fishing villages that have done that for a long time. And with all the exploitation that we have right now and all the pollution, a lot of those people can no longer sustain themselves on fishing as our ancestors did, which is very upsetting to me. But they were able to get away with storing 18,000 drums of hazardous waste.
Wow, for $100? Dude, U-Haul storage takes more.
Exactly. $100 a month, dude. And they did this until Nigerian students in Italy actually alerted officials when people started getting sick. it was affecting their lungs. People were just like falling sick out of nowhere. And that's actually what led to an investigation and stopped that. So I'm sure you're probably saying, all right, well, that was the 80s. Now we have the Bamako Convention. We're good. Wrong, because I have another really big case for you. This one happened in the port of Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire, also called Ivory Coast. And this was actually in 2006. A Dutch company called Probo Koala dumped and spread more than 500 tons of toxic waste at the port of Abidjan. So it was in grounds, public dumps, along the roads in populated areas. And actually, they told the people that it was just like sludge waste. That's what they told the people when they dumped it. And 17 people died and 13,000 people were injured.
Of what? Just this hazardous waste that they didn't tell them how to manage correctly?
But the thing is, like, they didn't even tell them what it was. So they misled them.
Oh, God. So it was just like out there in the open.
Right. And they spread it. And just think about this. It was at a port. So it was in the waterways. It was also in the roads. And ports are very busy areas. Imagine, like, when you spread something by the water, I mean, the fate and transport of that material is really hard to track, because now it is going to seep vertically, like, into the soil, but also horizontally, because water carries. So you create such a big problem. And so that's why this isn't behind us, because this was just 2006. And now we're facing an even bigger problem as the world becomes more and more technological, which is electronic waste. I mean, who doesn't want the latest phone? Am I right? Like, we all want to buy new phones. You want the latest computer. And no one ever thinks about where their old phones and their old batteries and their old computers end up. But most of it ends up in nations like this, under the guise of recycling and commodities and secondhand goods.
Yeah, so stop upgrading your phones every year, guys. Like, your phone can last 3 years at least. Please.
I know. I know you guys don't want to hear it, but an environmentally conscious thing we can do is try to use our electronics until we need to upgrade them.
But that's what I'm saying. People will just upgrade their phone just because they don't want to be left behind. And this whole influencer culture. And now, like, these companies are kind of like trying to build up on this more, that just looking at the back of your screen, that people take mirror selfies or whatever, you can tell what phone they're using, right? So everybody wanted that 3-camera phone. And they didn't care at what cost it was coming at. Not even like, okay, even if you remove the environmental cost, some of these people didn't even care for the economic cost it was putting on their own pockets, just because of the influencer culture. Yeah. And I think that's a real problem.
Yeah, influencer culture is definitely something that, I mean, I guess it has some benefits, you know what I mean? But there's a lot of bad that comes with the good. We definitely have to be more careful with that. So yeah, like I said, the issue of hazardous waste is major, and electronic waste even more so nowadays. And I think there's multiple reasons. I grew up in Lagos, and there's this market of sorts. It's called Computer Village. There's also one called Alaba International Markets that's very popular, and they're hubs for things like this. So people go there, and they're very popular. I've been there myself, and it's kind of a source of livelihood. There's an exploding population, and people go to recycle these things as well. So it's work. There's also really vague language, like we said, that's being used, not just in the international treaties themselves and conventions, but also in the shipping. Like, the shipping labels are very vague, and there's nobody forcing them to not be vague. In Ghana, there's a huge electronic market that's also sort of a dump called Agboblochie, and Adwa is going to talk about that a little more, but it's made the news several times. There's not enough jobs or opportunities for people in a lot of these countries. People are handling really dangerous stuff. The third thing that you have to think about is that these international instruments, like the Bamako Convention, they have little to no consequence. So the rest of the world just does not take African citizens seriously.
I think also they're kind of like fooling the African people into thinking that, oh, it's like almost waste dump, right? Like it's not completely waste yet when they send it over to these countries. And then like it has very little usage before it ends up in a dump because it was not, like it didn't have much of a life to begin with.
That's a very good point. So like I've covered some of these causes and you raise a good point. Like they're sending things and they're saying it's almost there but not quite. Why is it so important that we don't take on these huge amounts of waste? Like, what do you think?
I think it's like also something similar is how the Japanese cars end up in countries like, especially in Pakistan, we have a lot of secondhand. They're not exactly secondhand cars, because they're in Pakistan. They're sold as, because there's no registration. There's no previous registration done to them. So they're new cars, except they've been driven in Japan that has very serious regulations about how long your car can actually last on the road before it starts to emit, like starts to have certain emissions that don't comply with the new regulations. So they send them over to countries like ours, where this car will probably run for another few years, and now it's a dump, and now it's the problem of our country to take care of,
right?
Because that's what they did. And I think a lot of it, like you said, the branding and how the labeling is affected, it is that they're kind of fooling you into thinking that these are actually useful products, but they end up not being such.
Exactly. Yeah. And the thing is, like I said, like there's a lot of people relying on this type of work, but it's very dangerous when not done properly. Proper recycling of hazardous waste, including electronic waste, is key to not only the environment, but also to human health. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, honestly, when we talk about human health, like you said, there's like a large kind of toxic chemicals that are associated with e-waste, right? A lot of people don't realize, like, what do you think is going in your batteries? There's so many different chemicals, metals that are like arsenic, there's lead, there's zinc, like aluminum. What are you doing with these materials? And then what happens, especially when you have dump sites like these components essentially, like, they merge into your water, they merge into your soil. When they merge into water and they get into your water systems, you see a wide array of health issues that people have. Like, for instance, we've seen, especially like just talking about Africa, we've seen people with abnormal thyroid and reproductive function. People will have some discomfort. Also, like, when you talk about reproduction, this will carry on, like, either people are going to become, like, they're going to have fertility issues, they're going to have cancers of sorts, a lot of respiratory symptoms as well. So when we talk about actually recycling this e-waste, it consists of a large facility, like it consists of something that's like a facility that will house people, that will have communities, it will have hospitals, restaurants, trading. When all of this happens, and then there's chemical exposure that is beyond just the e-waste workers, this is now a community that includes women and children, and they commingle on these sites on a daily basis. So it's not just something that you're just affecting the worker, you're affecting people around it as well. Like you talked about Nigeria and like the computer village, or like the electronic market that is there. Now that's not completely waste, right?
No, and that's part of the problem. So the thing with a lot of these is that what you're having is like, so first of all, about 25% of what is shipped into Nigeria, as an example, is completely useless at this point. So there have been like surveys that have been done. It's completely useless. And according to the International Labour Organization, up to 100,000 people work in the informal e-waste recycling sector in Nigeria. They have to dismantle these things by hand. And a lot of what you deal with electronics, like you have arsenic, like you said, you have cadmium. You also have bromate products. You have like persistent organic pollutants, like things like that. These are not things that you want to be handling by hand. You have lead. They can seep into your skin. They can get into your lungs, like you said. And they're not necessarily well trained because they learned this as sort of a trade from somebody else who learned it informally as well. So it's informal, being taught over and over again. And I have to say, like, the Nigerian government, I know I haven't shit on them in a while, and it's due, because a good thing that they could be doing here is at the very least, putting in training programs to help these people who are trying to help themselves. You know what I mean? And they could be doing better at enforcement at the border. All they do is tax imports for Nigerians that are not crazy rich, the middle class, or just imports in general, but they are not taxing really wealthy people when they come in at the same levels, and they're not even really checking those shipping labels. Also, we need people who are checking these to have the training to know what they're receiving. Just because you see a bunch of computers and phones and you see a bunch of metals and then you're like, all right, well, it's recycling. So yes, our government is failing us in that way. It has to be better. And I've even bought stuff from Computer Village. Like, I don't know anybody who grew up in Lagos that hasn't been to Computer Village. And more, huge parts of Computer Village are just becoming like big storage of electronics that will never be used and never be fixed. And the people in there are talented. But after a while, like, their lifespan is being cut short because the right steps are not being taken.
And it's just not worth it.
Yeah, it's not worth it. So we have a big problem.
You know, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce this, but the Ghana market that you're talking about,
yes.
You know, like, they found sediment samples. And they found that the ones that were like near the disposal within the Ghana market, they actually contain such higher metal concentrations and organic chemicals. And like, obviously that gets into your soil, it's going to get into your vegetables, it's going to get into eventually like what you're consuming, and it does not just stay limited to just that site.
Exactly.
People really don't realize it.
I'm telling you. I know this is a little longer than our regular extra policy, but we missed last week. We wanted to give you guys a little longer as a present of sorts. But Aja, why do you think the world is just now talking about this? Like, this is just now popping up more in news media.
I think so studies have shown, like, until recently there wasn't a lot of available data that was especially like on chemical exposure in sub-Saharan Africa to talk about the e-waste that's happening at these recycling sites. But this is actually changing, and the scientific community in Africa has begun to address the problem, and I really hope that this will only bring out more. It will shed light on a lot more issues, and hopefully fingers crossed, the local governments will take action, and eventually international governments will take action as well. Like we saw, like, there's two companies that are essentially working for it. There's Recycling to Waste and another one that are trying to flip the narrative and sending this waste back to Europe, where there are better recycling sites, right? Mm-hmm. So I think they are trying to change the narrative, and they're saying because this waste is so important about like the effect that this waste has on just human health and the life expectancy and just the general quality of life, people have realized how important that is, and they're like, until you can find better recycling sources, better recycling methodologies in Africa, we should be handling this waste a lot more carefully, not just for like local people, but also like in general for the world. So I really like that as well.
Yeah, I really like that, and I totally agree. So you guys, I mean, this was a great discussion. Thank you for mentioning those companies, Adjoa. So do you guys have an e-waste recycling hub in your country? Like we talked about, do you have one like Computer Village in Lagos? Do you have one like Abobloshe in Ghana or somewhere else that you want to tell us about? Get in touch. We really want to hear. And
thank you for joining us for this Planet Policy Pals extra discussion. We will bring you one more extra policy, and then our series 2 begins on June 14th. So please remember to check that out. Follow us on Twitter at Planet Policy Pal, Instagram at Planet Policy Pals, and like our Facebook page. Remember, we are still on break, but if you message or leave a comment, we will respond. Join us again next time, and until then, keep learning, pals.